Hi everyone, this is Chris Rokosh from Inside Medical Malpractice. Thank you so much for joining us again today. I'm so glad you're here. This month, the tables are turned when I'm the one in the hot seat. Listen in as Angela Armstrong of Prime Capital Group interviews me about my entrepreneurial journey on her podcast, Prime for Growth, Conversations with Everyday Innovators. She asked me questions about my early days as a legal nurse consultant, the incredible highs and lows and ups and downs of growing Connect experts into the business it is today. Hear how this journey isn't just about getting somewhere. It's all about staying focused on core values and purpose that drive you along the way. The key motivator for me, it's always been never forgetting the heavy cost of malpractice on everyone involved. The doctors, the nurses, the patient, their families, our communities, our healthcare, legal, and social systems. I hope this podcast inspires and gives you insight both into the world of medical malpractice and me and my business. And it just sounds like a good conversation between two old friends, because that is basically what it was. After this podcast, Inside Medical Malpractice will take a short break for August while we take a family holiday, and then we'll be back again in September with some fantastic guests. So please enjoy, and thanks once again for being here.
Welcome to Prime for Growth, a podcast about the journey of possibility that entrepreneurs live every day. Our conversations with these everyday innovators explore why, when, and how they implement change in their businesses, and sometimes what happens when they don't. I'm your host, Angela, and I've been working with entrepreneurs while growing a financial services company for more than 2 decades. I've learned a lot from our clients over the years, and I hope you will too. Thanks for joining us on Prime for Growth. Today we meet Chris Rokosh, who is a nurse for 20 years before a chance call from a lawyer looking for a medical expert witness for a court case landed her in a space to explore what I call a blue ocean strategic moment. Despite the fact that she had never done it before, she became intrigued and started recognizing that there was huge demand, but that she couldn't fill it all because she didn't have all the expertise required. So what started out as a service for training some of her peers in how to be a medical witness turned into a business where she has many, many consultants working for her across the country. In fact, she spurred an entire category in the country.
You started out in caring for gorgeous little babies, and then you transitioned into this new world. What was that journey? What was the moment, like that tipping point where you said, this is a service that needs to exist here?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. It's a story I really like to tell, because even now I kind of look back on it with some level of amazement because what my story is, I've been nursing for a long time. In fact, last year I got my 40th or 41st years of being registered as a nurse in Alberta.
Congratulations. Oh, Chris.
I was like, how did that happen? Like, when did that happen? But after I spent a great part of my life in labor and delivery, helping, by my best estimate, I've been there for 10,000 deliveries of beautiful babies in many different hospitals and places. But after I've been working for about 20 years-ish as a nurse, mostly in labor and delivery, I was asked to provide expert opinion on a medical malpractice lawsuit where things had gone wrong in the birth, excuse me, and the baby had been quite damaged from, the allegations were that the baby had been quite damaged from a lack of adequate care during the labor and delivery. And a lawyer asked me to provide expert opinion on this case. It's a role I didn't even know existed, to be honest. But, I'm a yes kind of gal most of the time. So I said, sure, I'll take a look at this case for you and give you my opinion on whether or not the nurses and doctors, or the nurses in particular, did what they were obligated to do based on standards of care and standards of practice at the time. And there were a lot of issues in it. It was fascinating to look at. It changed my own nursing forever, to be honest with you, because I just thought, I'm never never doing that again, or never not doing that again. But the case ended up going just almost to court. It was literally the night before I was scheduled to go to court to appear as an expert witness and provide my expert testimony in front of a judge who would make a decision and a ruling on the case after they'd heard all the, plaintiff and defense evidence. And anyway, it settled literally on the courtroom steps the night before. The whole process to me was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. And I've always thought that those two emotions are just a thread apart. Fear and excitement, in my mind, are almost the same thing. It's just kind of how you frame them. But I talked to the lawyer after it was over, and I said, "How did you find me?" And he said, "Well, you know what? I just asked around, and I needed someone with your level of experience. I needed someone who could teach and speak and write." And I just started asking, but he ended that conversation. We talked for a long time, but he ended that conversation with, he said, "I have a hell of a time finding good experts." And I just heard that in my bones. I thought, well, I'm nursing for 20 years. I know lots of nurses and doctors, and I could help you with that. And out of that single statement from one lawyer who I'm still very good friends with today, because I tell him all the time, he changed my life. I did some more expert witness work myself. And then I developed a training program to teach nurses how to be good experts. And I borrowed and, this is big business in the United States. And I borrowed and studied and examined and did lots of time on my own internship, developed a course, and then built a business out of finding experts for lawyers. And in the midst of that, at the same time, I've also kept an education component to the company too, because as I learned more about law and how law can support medicine, and I was learning through my own work as an expert witness how medicine can support law and right outcomes, better outcomes across the table, I've still to this day kept an element of medical legal education, and I teach as much to lawyers and doctors and nurses as I do. I teach to them equally, because I really think the shared information makes us all better. In fact, I'm just hosting a webinar on Thursday, and the audience is a beautiful mix of plaintiff lawyers, defense lawyers, doctors, and nurses, with a doctor and lawyer presenting, because I think this is a conversation we all need to be having, because we're better if we know more. And as a young nurse, I never really truly understood the legal risks of my medical job.
On the subject of medical malpractice, entire libraries are dedicated to the complex system that evaluates, as Chris's medical expert witnesses do, in a factually neutral way, the real impacts that patients may suffer in cases where the standard of care has failed for some reason. Sometimes the failures are simple human error, sometimes there's staff overwhelm, sometimes there's new knowledge that's required. Hospitals can be slow to change because they're big institutions, and one of the critical functions of the intersection between the legal and medical communities is to bring standard of care gaps into the spotlight and prevail on the medical community to review, revise, and adopt better practices to improve clinical care and outcomes.
So I'm curious about patient care. And of course, this is a great segue into what you do, which is think about not just medical ethics, which I'm sure is philosophically a huge field, as opposed, and then practically in its application, a huge field, but just the humanity of the field of medicine, where people err, people make mistakes. It happened when I got my knee operated on. They gave me a Sharpie and they said, "This is how we make sure we don't operate on the wrong knee." Yeah. And after I wrote on my knee, I was like, "This is a good idea, but it's sort of scary that we have to do this." That somebody would say, right? Do the left knee, not the right knee. but this is where your business came about.
Well, first of all, the concept of why medical malpractice exists was foreign to me. I thought it existed to just scare the hell out of us all the time, every single day, and just to be a thorn in the side. But the truth of the matter is, it exists to help patients who are injured at the hands of healthcare providers through no fault of their own. It's a necessary system. And when I sort of understood understood that and looked at it from, if that was my mom, my daughter, my son, my husband, I would want some kind of recourse for damages to fix this situation. Because many people who are injured are severely injured, and there is no going back to work, and there is no social life. And, there's destitution in many ways by people who are seriously injured. So what I really didn't know, and acute care is so busy and labor and delivery is so busy, things happen and then people go home and you're on to the next patient. I really, in my lifetime of nursing, never grasped the concept of what that meant when the baby was born. And let's say there were seizures in the first 24 hours of life and there were issues and they went home. I never connected that in, because then they went home and life went on. I never connected.
Delivering baby number 9,999, right?
Yeah, on that shift some days. And I never connected to what it was really like, the experience of the family going home with that child and the long-term effects and damages, potential damages. So I didn't really know that. I do a lot of connecting nurses with outcomes, because I don't think healthcare is a great big moving ship, and information sometimes doesn't trickle down for years, and outcomes don't always trickle down at all. And policies and procedures don't change until something really serious has happened. And even then, it's got years of transformation to go through before it actually changes anything at the bedside regarding the bedside care. But the other thing is, I don't think I understood, and I don't think many nurses understood, how does the court view your responsibility as a nurse? What are the standards that you're going to be held up against? Who's
they
going
even know? Like, do the courts know on average? How would they know?
Well, that's why they hire me, experts like me, and all the experts who work with us. Is like a lawyer will have to say to them, the reason that Angela had to put a Sharpie X on her left knee before she went into surgery is because the standard of care requires that everybody going into that operating room is clearly aware of which limb you're going to be operating on. And that came about because there have been some wrong knees operated on, as you can only imagine. That's the slam dunk medical malpractice case right there. The wrong leg gets cut off or operated on, or the wrong breast gets taken off. All those things happen, not frequently, mind you. I mean, don't get me wrong here, because I know from working in hospitals that most of what goes on is magic. I mean, people get healed and babies get born and cancers get cured. And
we live a long time because, not just our good food and good nutrition in our part of the world anyway, but because we have excellent intervention and good support for our health.
Yeah, it mostly works, which is really good. But when it doesn't work, that's where I built a business out of finding the experts that lawyers need to tell them exactly the standard of care and causation issues, like what should have happened in this situation. Was this preventable? And if it was, what standards were missed or overlooked, or what breaches in the standard of care occurred that this accident happened. So the largest part of my business is finding expertise for lawyers in all sorts of malpractice cases, and sometimes criminal cases, and sometimes, Department of National Defense cases, depending on where the issues are. But the secondary part of my business is education, just telling nurses everything I've learned throughout this, and doctors, and say, there's 5 or 6 reasons why nurses can repeatedly get sued, and to just bring that to their attention and say, stop doing this. Like, let's talk about the real life consequences of these issues and just get better.
I think of what you're doing as more sort of creating a purpose statement for the medical practitioners and say, our purpose is to deliver with the highest integrity, the best standard of care, and the best sense of personal responsibility to the situation that we can, to bring the best that we can to the situation, and acknowledge there is humanity and we have error, and that's why there is insurance, that's why there's recourse. We put guardrails in place, and yours are sort of the thinking guardrails when you're doing this education to say, this is the why, this is your purpose statement. And remember, these guardrails are to protect you and the patient to just bring you back into a sense of awareness, because you can get into rote, you can get into status quo. If you're binge watching, you stop paying attention to the fact that you haven't moved all day. So if you're doing something repetitively, even like we were talking about earlier, maybe forgetting to wash your hands because you just got busy and you forgot that you can try.
Yeah, the other challenges of busyness and acuteness in our hospitals are real, So it's as much as things can get really routine, they can also get completely overwhelming because there's so much going on and a real lack of knowledge. And sometimes you're working on a unit you're not that comfortable or familiar with. There's a lot of that going on right now in the midst of this pandemic, where people are getting shifted around to jobs that they may not know as well as they'd like to know. And so there's a lot of barriers to being focused and present. And, it's easy to make mistakes. But I like how you said that, kind of providing a framework. The one thing is the public puts a tremendous amount of trust in healthcare. And as nurses, we are incredibly fortunate to be the number one trusted healthcare professional.
Wow.
Last time around, firefighters beat us out after 9/11, for a little while, but I think we're way up there. And I always try to remember, you can't take that lightly. People are literally putting their life and their trust in your hands. And you can't ever overlook that just for the sake of this is a job and I have to go to work and I'm tired, even though those things are so real. Your kids are sick too, and your dog's at the vet and your husband's lost his job. Those things are as real for nurses as they are for everybody. But there's also always has to be that elevated sense of, I'm here to do a job and I have to do it safely and I have to do it with care and compassion. And then it's walking the fine line of not giving all that away before you then go home and yell at your husband and kids. My husband and kids will tell you, unless they were literally bleeding out of their mouth and barely alive, they didn't get much of my attention.
Well, it's a big burden. Like, I think about the overwhelming sense of responsibility to literally have someone's well-being in your hands. I mean, I raised with my husband two beautiful young women, and there was a lot of sense of responsibility of making sure that they could get to adulthood. And as I just feel like they were not mine. I was just curating them on their own life journey to some place where they could manage to stand on their own, and I would still be there, but I would have to step back and say, okay, the strings are cut and now you're on your own. So for a nurse that's practicing in this healthcare field, that sense of responsibility it's weighty. And I'm sure sometimes it's exhausting, especially when you think about the overwhelm and the franticness of everything that's going on right now and so much uncertainty.
While most medical procedures have a high success rate, there's still a cost that's worth reducing on the patient side and on the insurance side. Medical errors have estimated to be the 8th leading cause of death in the US and the 3rd in Canada, right behind heart disease and cancer. Spending on healthcare in the US represents 17% of total GDP and is growing faster than the economy itself. Canada spends about 11.5% of GDP on healthcare. These are not insignificant costs, and so anything that causes reflection, adaptation, and improvement is certainly worth the investment.
When did your business go from being primarily education? Like, what was that tipping point before you started to feel like this is real? It's got a momentum of its own.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I wouldn't say I started out. I mean, I didn't have a master plan. I'd like to say I did, but I didn't have a master plan of how this would look. And so I started out just, I was working as a nurse and I was doing some expert witness on the side. And so I started out just teaching nurses how to be expert witnesses. And over time, the nurses would say to me, I want to do the work that you're doing. And us nurses by nature are not necessarily entrepreneurial, or not many of us. We're employed in big government jobs and we work in teams and we're not huge outside risk takers typically. So it probably took I taught the courses over 2 years, and I had a couple of hundred nurses trained on how to be legal nurse consultants. And they were saying to me, Chris, I want to work now. Like, help me find work. And I was at the same time doing my own expert witness work with lawyers. And lawyers were saying to me, because I gave all expert opinion typically on obstetrical cases or operating room cases or things that fit within my area of expertise. I couldn't give expertise on an ICU case and, other things, ER cases and other things that weren't within my. So lawyers at the same time were saying to me, could you find me a good emergency room nurse? Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, as a matter of fact, I can.
Stakes are high. When a human being's health has been compromised and another human accepts the task of helping remediate the problems, there are a range of things that arise, starting with the patient's emotional experience all the way through to their outcomes after the patient returns to their home environment. Humans are complex biological entities, each unique physically and psychologically. Managing the process of wellness and the interventions performed by medical professionals always has risk. But the guardrails established by access to litigation ensure that conversations are held on risk behaviors, risky practices, and risk-filled environments to improve them for the future.
You have to teach a nurse how to write a great CV for the legal world, how to put together a resume, and then, connect the two of them, and then teach them how to write a great medical legal expert report, and which is a trick all into its own. There's a lot of requirements for what that report has to look like. So it started there just with 1 or 2 nurses, and then 8 or 9 nurses, and then lawyers would say, "Do you have a surgeon who could also give opinion on this case?" And this is over 3 or 5 years this was all going on. And I would literally send my mom in the beginning to the library to read through old court documents to see what surgeons had given testimony in court previously and had been accepted by the judge. And it happened quite slowly. Thank goodness. I wanted it to happen faster. But when it did happen fast, I was like, oh, thank God this didn't happen 5 years ago, because I was not ready for this.
Be careful what you wish for, right?
Right? Yeah. And I would say, so I taught my first education. I did my first case in about 2001. I spent a lot of time learning and interning myself because it's never lost on me what an important role this is. It's not bedside care, but it's no less important. It's upholding the standard of care. And at the end of every lawsuit is a patient who's been injured and their family and all the problems that they're dealing with. So I took this very seriously to heart as a new part of my profession, not just a whim, not just an idea, but as a new part of my profession that I needed to do very, very well. So over 3 or 5 years, I started to build a team of experts and continue teaching the courses. And I would say by about 2012-ish, so 4 years after I started teaching, I had quite a boom in business. I had started to hire people. My husband had left his job, and he's got a great IT project management background, and he was a great assistant. Since that time, we've just grown and grown and grown to the point that we have about somewhere between 250 and 300 experts working every single day on cases across the country. And as lawyers ask for, sometimes they need a midwife or a respiratory therapist or an occupational therapist or someone who runs a radiology clinic or a pediatric surgeon who works with a very, very particular type of equipment in a very particular sized hospital in this particular province. So I now have a team that just does nothing but find the exact right expert and connects them with lawyers.
In 2002, medical malpractice as a proportion of health spending was 1.7% in the United States, but only 0.47% in Canada. Total cost of settlements, legal fees, and insurance was $4 per person in Canada, but over 4 times that in the U.S. In the United States in 2018, over $4 billion was paid out in medical malpractice settlements.
And I was an unknown person coming out of the blue and a nurse, besides not a lawyer. There was a lot. I wouldn't say it was hard to break into the industry, but I had to be patient. It took time. I had to build trust. I had to build relationships. There's so much in the legal world that's built on precedent, and both law and healthcare are slow-moving ships, and they're not going to turn around anytime soon. So that was a big part of it, is just inserting myself in there into the legal world and normalizing the role of expert witness in the medical world. There was a lot of I could never say anything bad against a nurse or a doctor. There's a lot of that kind of thinking initially, but through the teaching of understanding the rights of the public to file a medical malpractice case and the responsibility of experts to uphold the standard of care in their profession, it's not a good old boys club where we do what we do and this is our culture and this is how it goes. It's upholding excellence in healthcare. And so there was a lot of teaching on both sides and a lot of building trust on both sides. And then building that bridge. I mean, my company name is Connect to Medical Legal Experts, and it's building that connection between healthcare and law and having all of them trust me and trust us as a company to do what's right and what's best without any bias about who's right or wrong. Because I find experts for plaintiff lawyers, for defense lawyers, for, like I said, Department of Justice, Department of National Defense. I can never be seen as someone who's biased or judgmental about anything that's happened. It's very factual. This is what happened. This is what the standard of care was in place at the time. This is what should have happened. And then this is the outcome. So never, though, thinking anybody's right or wrong or good or bad. Just was the standard of care met in this situation? And then, there's doctors who have the job of putting together the issue of causation. But I mean, that's a different topic. But that's how it went. It's taken many years. I'm now 20 years into it, just like you, Angela, 20 years exactly in it. It's been a journey. It hasn't all been fun. It hasn't all been easy. It's taken a tremendous amount of grit and persistence and, courage, for lack of anything else, or maybe just completely uninformed optimism. I'm not really sure what it is there, but it's been here I am. And here you are, 20 years.
Yeah, it's a journey of, it's a combination of having a vision and then being curious about whether you can execute on that vision. And I'm sure you and I and every entrepreneur that I've had the privilege of meeting has not just one moment in their journey where they go, I don't think I really know what I'm doing. And I don't like the term fake it till you make it, because it seems like it sort of implies that your intention is to defraud people. And of course, that's not it. It's to say, I have a vision. I just don't have perfect clarity on what the right path is.
87% of the 137,000 businesses that are started daily end up closing. The vast majority of those close at the founder's discretion. But of the 13% who do make it past that initial stage, only a small fraction of those are dedicated to building an entirely new category. Building a business in a known market is daunting enough. You still have to overcome friction to your clients that includes existing relationships, incumbent brand recognition, and having very clear differentiation between your offering and the competitor's offering. Building a business in a brand new category is an even bigger leap of faith, because your clients may not even know that they need what you're offering. This was Chris's scenario. The concept of medical legal expert witnesses was working well in other countries, but Canada has a very conservative approach to adopting new things and ideas, and the existing framework was very functionally engaged.
Did you ever have a moment where something went direly wrong? And I mean dire from your vantage point, and you felt very defeated. Did you ever consider, maybe I need to give this up?
Oh, yeah. How much time do you have? I think I could answer that on a couple of different levels. On a very personal level, when I started out as an expert witness, and I was just solo for the first few years, doing expert witness work myself. The first time I went to trial, I'd never even been in a courtroom, and the experience of being cross-examined, it's what keeps a lot of healthcare people out of doing any expert witness work, because I mean, some people love the challenge, but most of us find it very difficult and incredibly grueling. And healthcare is not by nature adversarial. So when you're in the hot seat, and the very first time I went to court, I was cross-examined for a long time, alone in kind of a small town in a bad hotel. And of course, you're not sequestered. It's not like you're a jury, but you're under oath and you can't talk to anybody, you can't phone anybody and say, this sucks, That was a very difficult experience. I was on the stand for a couple of days. At the end of the day, the judge, the case was lost. The lawyer that I had been hired by lost the case. And I'd given it what I thought was my best shot. And I believed in that case there were some significant issues with the standard of care. Things could have gone differently, but the case was lost. And I would say that first experience going to trial in an unsuccessful case, and I think we all have a tendency to take on and say it's my fault. I was one, and it wasn't. I know now that it wasn't. I was one witness out of dozens over a 6-week trial. But I took that loss and it was a baby case where a baby had died. And that one hit me really hard.
I imagine. I mean, considering that was what got you into nursing, right?
Yeah, that was a very personal hit for me. And it took me, and I did definitely have, some days of thinking, what am I doing here? I mean, it's so much more fun delivering babies than doing this, But I kept going, and I can't even explain why. But in the business, there's been a couple of things too. The role of the legal nurse consultant is big business in the US. So 25 years old and 25,000 strong, and maybe 45 years old and 45,000 strong now. And the nurse as a legal advisor is very ensconced in law offices and hospitals and risk management, insurance companies. And they do a lot of cost of future care. They do all sorts of things. And so I just boldly, when I was getting started, just thought, I'm just going to take that model and bring it here. And so I had a couple of stupendous fails where I literally did the dog and pony show from coast to coast. I went to my top customer offices, the biggest malpractice lawyers in the country, and tried to sell them on the idea of hiring a legal nurse consultant for their office. And biggest fail ever. Not one of them still to this day, 20 years later, has a nurse in their office. So I've had a couple of big losses like that where I just saw an idea which to me made perfect sense, and it's working well in other countries, and let's bring it here. And so I've had definitely a few days, and I'd walk in the room and I'd start my pitch and they'd sit back and cross their arms. So I definitely had a few things like that make you question just your business approach, your knowledge, your ideas. But, and it's been scary, the law, like I said, and a lot of the lawyers that we work with, a lot of lawyers who do malpractice are very senior lawyers, and they have their way of doing things. The law itself is built on precedent, and it's taken a lot of courage, and there's been a lot of, I don't know, failure, but certainly rejection of ideas that I thought would be brilliant that nobody else thought would be good at all. So I've definitely questioned, without a doubt, and still do. I think this is a very up and down. I think being an entrepreneur is a very up and down kind of thing, and you can have the highest point of your entire career at 10 o'clock in the morning and the lowest point of your entire career at 2 o'clock that same afternoon based on what's going on. So I've just kind of had to learn to accept that and not get too, luckily there's more good days and bad days right now, and, just carry on.
When you were in those dips, when you come out of one of those, this idea was brilliant. Why is nobody else seeing how brilliant this is? How do you retool? Like, do you have a process for going away and reflecting, or do you quickly discard and move on? What is your personal method for pushing through that and resolving what are you going to do next? What comes next after the dip?
Well, I think it depends on the day. Sometimes I can just kind of brush it off and say, oh well. But if I've invested a lot of time and energy and money into the idea, I think, I'm not against having a little drink. I'm not a drinker, but certainly just sit down and calm down and change your frame of mind a bit. I try to look deep and see, what did I miss here? And I think in that particular instance with my brilliant ideas, I didn't actually go to the customer and say, what do you think of this idea? As nearly as in depth as I should have, or to as many people as I should have. I just showed up with my idea without talking to the customer. And so I try to learn what I can about why that idea failed. And then, but that's just one part of it. I mean, that's just your logical brain. And then you've still got all your emotions and stuff to deal with. I'm a big talker. I have a big family of sisters. I have a great family, and my kids are grown up and they're great. I'm a yogi, and I try to meditate, and I get outside and walk when I can. But it's not an easy shake off sometimes, right? And sometimes I find myself even pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing until it's just so obvious that it's a fail. And then at some point you just have to say, well, that's just not going to work. Move on. But it's a little bit of a messy process with me, Angela. I wish I had something simple that I could tell you that worked, and I could share it with everybody and it worked for them too. But the truth of the matter is, there's the logical issues to deal with and the lessons to learn. But then there's, trying not to beat yourself up, to not be ashamed, not be embarrassed, and to keep your heart open enough that you're back open and vulnerable again to try again on your next new idea with the knowledge that you've got. You've learned from it, but you're not jaded and closed and afraid to try, afraid to try again.
How do you then, if you're coming out of a dip, that sounds like there's some resilience, some acceptance, some self-reflection. I hear those as really important attributes of that resilience and agility piece. What is your favorite thing? How do you keep yourself fresh? What's that favorite thing about the learning, about continuing to explore? You come up with new ideas. How do you keep yourself engaged creatively after 20 years of doing this, of building this niche that didn't exist before in Canada? How do you then continue to find new ideas and push your own boundaries and your own envelope?
That's a really good question, because I wouldn't say after 20 years I'm as fresh or as pushy as I was, but I think my best, I'm really fortunate that every single case that comes through the door is very different. There's some common elements to that, but there's a person and there's a story and there's an outcome and there's a particular type of expert that needs to be attached. There's no two cases that are ever alike. And, we were talking about curiosity before, and I have an insatiable curiosity about healthcare and the law. That keeps it, keeps the juices flowing a little bit. But I think also I try really hard to listen very carefully. I think because I've been stung by trying to bring new ideas to healthcare and law that have been shot down so, ungloriously, that I've tried to really listen. And I get my best sparks, I think, just sometimes by casual comments from lawyers who'll say, man, I'm really having a hard time with this. And it'll, it's like, bing, a light bulb goes on, and I will throw myself into action and try to make that happen.
If you choose to build a business that is a category creator, there are some key ideas you can focus on to have success. Number 1, find the early adopters. That doesn't necessarily mean go out and land a whale of a client. It might be that your model is solving an intractable problem for a group of users that later become your brand evangelists. There's a great story on this model about House, the app, on Masters of Scale. Number 2, ignore the competition. After all, if it really is a new category, defining yourself by what's already out there might just end up reinforcing the power of incumbency for your prospects. Number 3, be unique in your offering, but find a way to insert your product or solution into your client's current model. This helps you get to that adoption stage earlier, as clients don't have to change everything they're doing to go with you. When a client adopts it, have them tell the story to your other prospects. Lever every success story into a new opportunity. Your sales model is going to be, therefore, as unique as your product is. Number 4. Just as in real estate, where the mantra is location, 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 in new category creation, it's education, education, education. Your marketing needs to be focused on finding unique ways to allow clients to experience the benefit that your product brings. Chris focused on educating all of the lawyers in the space that this service existed and could bring value to their cases. And she went coast to coast to coast on education junkets, delivering seminars, doing talks at conferences. And these are all still cornerstones of her brand marketing. You can also check out her more recent innovation, which is her podcast called Inside Medical Malpractice, available through her website. Number 5, be focused and be brave. Although your clients might say to you, instead of what you're suggesting, what we really need is this. Unless this is a much better idea with a really broad audience and potential prospect list, you can't be everything to everybody. And trying to do so, or doing so justified by your need to make money, is a distraction that can really turn into a huge dilution of your funds, your resources, and your time.
And the other thing that's been a challenge and a continuing journey for me is learning how to be a leader. I jumped into this as a nurse who'd never done any kind of entrepreneurship, or not much anyway. And this, and for a long time, I just thought of myself as just a nurse who had a business. But over time, I've really had to, as I'm sure you know, grasp the concept of leadership and become a strong leader. And, the time that we're in right now with the COVID pandemic, become a strong leader all over again, even on days when you were struggling as much as everybody else is struggling, with this stuff. Because we were talking, I'm a type A extrovert, and this has been some kind of personal hell for me to be in isolation for this long. But learning how to lead in this particular time has presented a new challenge for me almost every single day. Get up, get dressed, do your hair, get some makeup, and show up your best self, because your people need you. And like I mentioned just briefly earlier, I've never in nursing, and I'm grateful for this, I've never forgot what an important job this is. I feel a huge sense of responsibility to give it my best and to just never, ever think this doesn't matter, or I can be tired, or I can just do this and then be done with it. I never think that. So that's made me a bit of a perfectionist, which is its own, difficulty we could talk about for a day and a half. But I try to stay motivated because I know that there's a person on the other end of everything I'm doing. And I know that malpractice affects hospitals and societies and patients and families and law and healthcare and our social systems. So I just try to remember that. I don't always, some days I'm just like, damn, this is hard. But I do try to remember to never forget that important part.
As far as category creation goes, I love this story of Clarence Birdseye. He was a native of Brooklyn, New York, but he spent time in Labrador, Canada between 1912 and 1917. While there, he observed how the local indigenous peoples would catch fish in the winter and allow it to flash freeze, thereby preserving it. What he also noticed when he tried it himself was that the freshness of the fish was so much better. The quality and the taste, the texture were all really good. A few years later, working with a fishing lobby back in the US, he learned about a huge problem. In the industry, massive quantities of caught fish were spoiling before they could get sold, representing a huge amount of lost profit. At that time, frozen food was really unappealing to consumers because of the strategies that they used to freeze the food created crystallization, therefore creating a really deteriorated quality and taste of the products. So frozen food was actually considered a really inferior product. He applied his knowledge of flash freezing to this business problem and formed his first frozen food company in 1923. Unfortunately, the idea is never quite enough. He ran out of capital in a few years because the market was really slow to adopt. It cost him a lot of money to generate the technology in order to do the flash freezing, and he just couldn't get all the way through. He partnered with another company, continued to pursue, and over time, they had success. They had to package the product in a completely new way, so they had to innovate the packaging. They didn't have good transportation avenues. It was not that common for people to have grocery cases with freezing, so they had to help innovate display cases. They had to innovate all of these problems one at a time, at the same time educating the consumer that this product had better quality, better taste, and was more nutritious than traditional frozen food. In fact, was as nutritious as fresh food. They had to change the consumer buying behavior. It wasn't until World War II when they got their first really big growth spurt. When men went to war, the women went to work, and the need to put a nutritious, quality, fast meal on the table became more imperative than ever. The frozen food industry is a $300 billion industry today. Category creation isn't easy, and it took Clarence years of solving the barriers to market one at a time to be ready to take advantage of the market when it finally arrived. If you're going to pursue this method of business model, you're going to have to rely heavily on the skills of patience, grit, and determination.
Well, you talked about having a closet full of case files that sometimes you need to distance yourself from. And what I know about you, Chris, is that your heart comes with you wherever you go. That is, I mentioned your smile is like an embrace. It's so welcoming. And I think that's your smile is the avatar of who you are, really. It is you. And so hard to look at those case files where there is pain. There's going to be pain on both sides of the table. There's a patient that suffered, but there's a medical provider who never wanted that outcome. And so everyone has to navigate their way through this incredibly difficult thing. And there you are in the middle, but the act of putting those boxes in the closet, is that your act of disconnection from, because what you do all day long is connect, and is that how you maintain a bit of sanity as well?
Yeah, it is. See, I'm going to cry now, and I just appreciate so much what you just said, because I have a lot of joy in my heart. My natural state of being is joyful, and this is a tough gig. There's no doubt about it. But I do, like I was just saying, I do take this responsibility very seriously, and that's exactly what it is to remove myself physically. And I work at home. My office is in my home. It has been for 20 years. And I have an office with a door where the files are behind there. And then I leave here and I close this door and I go upstairs because I do need some separation from the weight of all. I'm happy to do it. And I think we all, I think about the job you do sometimes, Angela, and the money you're dealing with and the stuff you deal with. Like, to me, that feels like a tremendous amount of weight too, that I'm not sure I could shoulder. I think we all learn how to shoulder, pull our own wagon, whatever our wagon happens to be and whoever happens to be in it. But that's exactly what it is sometimes I just need separation from the hurt and the pain and the sadness and the disability and the devastation that comes from this. And it's a fine balance to see this and know all the bad stuff that goes on, but also know from 40 years of experience, the magic that also goes on in healthcare, that a lot of good goes on, and then find the resolve in the midst of all that to try to make it better, to try to heal what I can and fix what I can and open communication where I can.
Chris is one of a kind. She took her passion for healthcare and patient support into building a brand new category in the marketplace. And now her business connects legal professionals with medical experts to help improve case outcomes for patients in Canada. A blue ocean strategy like Chris undertook is not for the faint of heart. It does take tremendous grit and persistence, and the ability to solve lots of barriers along the way, from educating the marketplace that your product is even necessary or possible, all the way to, for example, Clarence's cold food distribution, where he had to actually innovate things like, how do I display my product in the marketplace? The barriers in a blue ocean strategy are not insignificant. They're just unknown. In the red ocean, you know what the competitors look like and how things are operating. In a blue ocean, you can exploit the fact that you don't have the same kind of competitive pressures. However, the barriers are still there. They're just going to be different, and you may trip across them over the course of your business evolution. If you're patient enough, persistent enough, and resourceful enough, a blue ocean strategy can be an incredibly rewarding way to build a business.
Prime for Growth is produced by Prime Capital with support of Canadian Western Bank, the bank for entrepreneurs who is obsessed with your success, and the business execution specialists, Results Unleashed, who help you bridge the gap between strategy and execution. Till next time, go forth and innovate.
Thanks so much for listening to Inside Medical Malpractice. Without you, we wouldn't be here. This podcast was produced in person or remotely at When Sparks Fly Production Studios in Calgary. Please subscribe or give us a good rating and a thumbs up if you enjoyed the podcast. That helps us rise to the top. If you have ideas to share for a show or a topic you'd like to hear discussed, if you're a healthcare professional interested in medical legal work or education, or if you're a lawyer looking for a great expert, you can find us at connectmlx.com.